This is By Design from the Fast Company Podcast Network. I'm Liz Stinson.
And I'm Mark Wilson. Welcome to our first episode.
Our first episode. This is so exciting, Mark.
This is the first design podcast there's ever been. So I can't believe it took this long.
Right. The history of podcasts. But, Mark, it seems like everyone has a podcast these days. And I'm glad we finally have one.
Yeah, truth be told, this is one of those ideas we've debated at Fast Company Design, I think, for some time. Part of my mentality on this was the world doesn't need another podcast. It doesn't need another design podcast. And then my other thought was, well, nobody's really that critical in terms of design in this space. Like, there isn't a really, strong design criticism, I think, across the board. I think this is a very self-congratulatory industry. And I think we can have fun, but also move the discourse forward a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever feel like when you tell people what you do, that you're a journalist who covers design, do they look at you with a little bit of a blank stare? And then you have to explain what you mean by design. And it's always a little bit of a justification, right? Like, no, we're not covering chairs or wallpaper. Although, I love a beautiful chair and I love beautiful wallpaper.
Chairs are great.
Nothing wrong with that. But, we're covering the way the world works. And I think there's just a lot of space to examine what that means through the lens of what we do at Fast Company, which is, the intersection of design, of business, of innovation.
Exactly. I have had that conversation where I've had to explain, well, yeah, we're into interior design, but also industrial design, UX design of platforms, even going into how Taco Bell designs a menu item is, these are all layers of design. And I think they're topics that we sort of uniquely hone in on.
And we're going to be covering all of that on this podcast, and I'm really excited for it. We've got an excellent show today featuring one of the most famous designers of our time, Michael Bierut, plus our picks for the best and worst new designs.
But first, let's get into the latest news from the world of design.
Today, we're excited to announce our broadest design update ever. Our goal is a beautiful new design that brings joy and delight to every user experience.
Okay, so Apple just unveiled what it's calling the biggest redesign in its history. It's called Liquid Glass, and it's effectively a reskin of the user experience that will unify iOS, macOS, iPadOS, and watchOS, which is just so many OSs under one design umbrella starting this fall. So Mark, you were at WWDC, Apple's annual developer conference earlier this month, where Apple showed off Liquid Glass for the first time.
We challenged ourselves to make something purely digital feel natural and alive, from how it looks to how it feels as it dynamically responds to touch.
So let's just start with the basics. What is Liquid Glass for people who might not know, and why is it such a big deal?
So Liquid Glass is what Apple is calling its sort of biggest redesign in history. It's certainly its biggest, I think, facelift since iOS 7. If everybody remembers, the iPhone went from being very skeuomorphic with its felt poker tables and then became very airy and flat. So Liquid Glass is basically a metaphor they're borrowing from Vision OS, their virtual reality, mixed reality headset. And it imagines basically the foundations of interface as glass, semi-transparent glass. And underneath it, you can see your blurred sort of bending photos. You can see text. You can see all of these things. But, essentially what it is today is a reskin of all of the OSs we know with this glass forward interface.
Right. And I think the reaction has largely been, okay, cool. This is it. And it's really hard to judge these things until you live with them. And, I don't mean for a week. I mean for a significant period of time. I mean, it takes
until you forget about them or you don't. Right? That's
exactly.
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of time for people's brains to accept change, particularly when it comes to an experience that they're really close to. And, what are you closer to than your iPhone? Unfortunately true. So anyway, I imagine Apple did not make this decision lightly. And I want to know what you learned from your reporting.
Yeah, I mean, talking to members of Apple, what I gathered were, I think, a few things here. One, they want to clean things up and have sort of one interface to rule them all. And I think that's one of those grand ideas that's great. They want to bring a little bit more joy and expressivity to interface again. And I think we've all lived through the flatification of logos and sort of this like sans serifing of everything. And look, people right now are like, Gen Z, Gen Alpha are on apps where they're adding stickers, remixing things. It is just like maximal interface everywhere. And I think like to some extent, Apple is reading the room a bit, feeling the cultural space that UX is in. Incidentally, like Google's adding a lot more expression to their interface too. So Apple's not really working in a vacuum. And then I think the big thing is those like question marks for what it means for the next 5 to 10 years. And their bet is that sort of no matter which way they go with interface in the future, mixed reality or augmented reality, or is a headset, is it something else, that liquid glass will sort of be adaptable and flexible into those spaces, right? Like we're talking about artificial intelligence forward designs. You could kind of imagine this glass like melting and molding to almost anything they could dream of. But that's like the best side of the promise. I think where people are very critical, and I like the design world is incredibly split on this. It's very polarizing. Some people are like, look, let Apple do their thing. Let them dream up the future. Just shut up until you see. And then other people are saying it has zero new functionality. Right now, it challenges legibility in much of the interface. And it's sort of a promise on the future where they haven't shown, I believe, a single use case that really expands on what you can do today.
Yeah, so someone in the piece you wrote about liquid glass called the design masturbatory, which is very evocative as a descriptor. But, the word really gets to the crux of what people are asking, which is, did Apple really need to do this? And did they need to do this right now?
Yeah, and I think that's a good answer, and it's a good response. And I think a lot of people are just really asking the question, like, what are they going to sort of contribute to artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence design? And people are waiting on that, and so the glass feels like perhaps a bit of a distraction to them. It's certainly not the answer to the future. It could be a component of their future strategy. I will say this, though. What I have enjoyed about the design is, masturbatory or not, the execution of bits and pieces like the magnifier tool are so far beyond really what you see anyone else doing in this space.
Explain to us what the magnifier tool does exactly.
Yeah, so you know how you can double tap a word right now and like zoom into it essentially? It's some control like that.
Awful experience.
Awful experience. Well, right now, they're moving to what looks like almost like a water droplet that sort of floats across your screen, and it actually like distends and bends the letters under it while also magnifying them. But it is absolute visual design overkill. This is just flexing, stunting UX design.
Fun.
And so, yeah, so you can love it or not. I mean, I want to play with it. It was my favorite part of playing with the demos was that magnifier tool. Then I think there are other pieces where it's just like, I think they got to do some cleaning to sort of make sure that it's legible and functional for people.
Yeah, Apple is really good at making using a phone pleasurable. And I hope that once this is put into practice, once people are actually using it, it does feel that way. I mean, when you say the letters are bending, I'm a little skeptical.
That doesn't make you want to upgrade the iPhone right now? You don't want those bent letters?
I'm still using an iPhone mini and I'm holding on to it for as long as I possibly can. My husband just got, I think, the iPhone 16. He brought it home last night and it's gigantic. And he told me he didn't even opt for the large one.
You're like, this is monstrous.
I think we have the opportunity here to kind of completely reimagine what it means to use a computer.
This brings us to a story that is old in internet time, but will probably be relevant for what I assume to be years to come. Sam Altman of OpenAI and Jony Ive, formerly of Apple and now head of the design studio Love From, also the hardware company I.O., are teaming up. In May, OpenAI acquired Ive's I.O. for $6.5 billion. That is so much money. And it's also a concerning development for Apple, whose stock price apparently dipped nearly 2% when the news broke.
I mean, the reason being, aside from I.O. being staffed with a lot of ex-Apple talent, like literally the person who was designing the iPhone at Apple, is that I.O.'s mandate is to create what they're calling a family of hardware products for OpenAI.
The first one we've been working on has just completely captured our imagination.
We don't really know what these products are going to be yet, but there's been some speculation, some leaks about what the first device will look like when it arrives in 2026.
Yeah, so Mark, you've done some reporting on this story, and I'm curious to know what you make of Ivan Altman's promise to deliver a piece of AI hardware that's actually useful, because I think what we've seen up to this point is AI hardware that have been absolute flops.
Right. I mean, 100%. So far, we really, I think, had two big entrants, which were, the Humane AI pen made by an ex-Apple designer, and the Rabbit R1, which was like a walkie-talkie with teenage engineering influence.
Very, very cute.
Very, very cute, very different products. I think both fundamentally not really going to usher in the age of AI hardware. In the case of Humane, they essentially took the iPhone and removed the screen and shrunk it down onto your lapel. They took away a lot of controls and they said, this is going to make your life better. It didn't really work as well as they said it would. Functionally, it didn't work as well as they said it would. And conceptually, it didn't work either.
Yeah, I mean, it was never going to pull you away from your phone.
100%. I mean, it was probably the worst tech demo I'd ever experienced. Trying it for the first time, just all around.
I remember you coming back from that meeting and being like, this is not going to go well for them. And you were right.
I mean, I was trying to be open-minded. So there was that. And then, the Rabbit R1 by Jesse Liu. This is an entrepreneur who sold a major company to Baidu in the past, had built a sort of Amazon Alexa type competitor. So he builds the R1 to be like a walkie-talkie for AI. It is an absolutely stunning design, and it is emergency orange to the max, right? You can hold it in your hand, all just very toy-like. And it was meant to be like a little Pokedex for AI, is kind of how he described it. But, I think another case of where people got it in their hands and they realized the models were really kind of immature and it didn't work nearly as well as they wanted to.
Right. I mean, there's just no functionality there, which at the end of the day has to be there in order for there to be adoption. So what makes what Ive and Altman are proposing different?
I mean, this is the question, and this is all just based upon sort of, leaks and rumors we've seen. But there's kind of this, I guess, second wave of AI devices coming out that essentially just record everything and transcribe it. And so, our understanding is that this I/O device will be kind of a little puck, the size of a macaron. It'll probably have an audio and sort of video component in it. It'll just suck in a whole lot all the time. And then hopefully, with whatever it sucks in, right, like transform that via AI magic into the brave new world of computing.
I love the hand waving of the via AI magic.
Yeah.
We have no idea how that works or what it's going to look like, but it is going to be AI magic.
It's really tough to parse at this time. I connected with Jony Ive a few years ago when I think, some of this was sort of fomenting in his brain. And, he walked me through what he considered the three great modalities behind all of computing. Originally, we got the GUI, sort of all that like Xerox PARC, mouse folder stuff that really defined the Mac. We got voice controls, right? Like Alexa, Siri, the ability to talk to a computer. And then we got multi-touch, which, obviously powers the iPhone. Heard a lot of people say like, that's pretty self-serving. But really, when you look at the significance of sort of lining all the multi-touch technologies up into sort of one umbrella, you have the most successful computing metaphor of all time. Like literally 7 billion phones are on the planet right now with multi-touch. So
right.
I think it's pretty successful. So, his question is like, AI will allow sort of a fourth modality or fourth modalities, right, that we haven't imagined, where you have to translate that AI intuition into, human sensation. And so for him, it really felt like, one of the ultimate questions of our time. And when, him and Sam Altman actually made the announcement of I/O, like they really touched on a lot of these themes, right? And sort of the great scale of work here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like they're really circling around the idea of what some people call ambient computing, which in theory would break us free from the screens that we are inundated with. And I think what's really interesting is that best case scenario that this technology will be part of our environment. It can make sense of our lives. It will intuit our intentions before we make them known. I mean, it's really like the ideal of computing if they can pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many privacy concerns, there are energy concerns, there are just all the reasonable sort of talking points on why you can and probably should be skeptical of the project as it's building, right?
Yeah.
Living our lives and thinking less about our computers.
Sure. I mean, everybody needs technology, wants technology, but they don't want to see the technology. But I think we should really talk about the privacy implications here because they are huge. I mean, the way that you described it is that in order for this to work, this device is going to have to know almost everything about you, but it's going to have to dig deep into your life in order to produce any sort of utility. And that to me is obviously terrifying in some ways, but I think when you consider how much we've already traded of our privacy for utility, I think it's going to be a slippery slope, and I think we're going to slide down it really, really fast.
It's so hard to say because right now our trade-off for privacy has been an invisible process, right? Like nobody really wants to talk about like the apps on our phone that have actually been tracked, like listening to us, listening to commercials playing through our TV to then serve us an ad, right? Which was basically stuff happening a decade ago. So we've actually had these surveillance devices on us for a long time. They've been exploited. They've been abused. However, I would say like literally something that will record everything about your whole life all of the time is absolutely a level to which we haven't seen, at least as an overt process before.
Right. I mean, and you wrote about this in your piece. At the end of the day, this system is going to be making judgment calls about our lives in a way that computers just simply do not do at this point in time. Okay, that's the news. We'll be back with Michael Bierut after this break. Our guest this week is Michael Bierut, the legendary designer from Pentagram. And it just so happens that Fast Company writer Lily Smith recently published a fantastic profile on Michael. So we called her up before our chat with him to find out what we need to know. Lily, hello.
Hi, Liz. Good to hear from you.
Where are we finding you?
You are finding me here in Bologna, Italy, a few thousand miles away, but I'm so glad to get this call.
Yes, thank you so much. So Mark and I are about to talk to Michael Bierut, who you spent a lot of time with while you were reporting your big profile on him. We just want the download. What do we need to know before we talk with him?
Yeah, so Michael has been a partner at Pentagram, one of the world's most famous design studios, for more than 30 years. Pentagram is a firm that started in London in the 70s. It opened in the 90s here in New York around when Michael joined the firm. And you know a lot of his work. He's designed logos for some of the biggest brands on the planet. So think Mastercard, Slack, Verizon, and Saks Fifth Avenue. He designed Hillary Clinton's iconic H logo for her 2016 presidential campaign. He's become really as much of a celebrity inside of the world of design as one can be.
Can you tell us why you decided to write this profile right now?
Yeah, Michael recently stepped back from his position as a full-time partner with a team at Pentagram and into a new role that they're calling strategist at large, which refers to his new advisory position to his fellow partners on their projects. So it felt like a good time to really zoom out and look at his career and the impact he's had over the decades, because it has been significant. And this also is a big move for him. He's dedicated his life to making design something non-designers care about. He's designed logos, he's written books, he's pioneered design criticism. And in the process, he's really shaped a generation of younger designers who've been influenced by his perspective on design and its place in the broader business world. So, Michael told me that he felt it was time to let this new generation lead, especially in, the new context that we're living in. And I wanted to understand the legacy he built for himself as he shaped the visual landscape of our world.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have a lot to talk to him about. Lily, thank you so much for talking with us. And listeners, be sure to check out Lily's piece on fastcompany.com. And now, on to our interview. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Mark. Glad to be here.
You are really the guinea pig, so thank you for that.
So don't fuck it up. It's all on your shoulders on this one.
I accept that awesome responsibility.
So I wanted to set the stage a little bit. You have been a partner at Pentagram for more than 30 years, but recently you stepped back into semi-retirement and have taken on a new role as strategist at large, which is something that we can get into later. But first, I just want to know, it's Friday morning, it's 11:30-ish. Now that you're free from going to work every day, what are you typically doing on a Friday morning?
Every morning, including when I was commuting Monday through Friday down to Manhattan from my house in Westchester County, I run, well, they used to run without in quotes. Then I ran for a long time in quotes, and now I sort of ironically shuffle or walk 3 miles every morning, sometimes along the banks of the Hudson River, sometimes in some beautiful parks we've got up here. So this morning I did that. Then I stopped at the grocery store and picked up some things that we needed. Then I came back here and did some exercises. I put on a record and sat with my wife of 45 years or so, Dorothy, and had some coffee. And then came down and rearranged the furniture a little bit for this session. So I have a busy day. What can I tell you?
I've talked to a lot of successful, leaders, for lack of a better term. And a lot of them have been married to a person for a really long time. There's a really strong Venn diagram of successful people and people who just have long-term life partners. So, obviously tracks for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Dorothy and I first met in the 9th grade. We were actually going to different schools at that point, but then our 2 junior high schools got merged into the same high school. And we became a couple in February 1974 and got married in July 1980. And she was the first girl I ever kissed. I was, she tells me, the second boy she ever kissed. And we've been together ever since.
Is that a personality trait? That was the subtext of your question mark, right? Is that something that you identified in terms of being consistent throughout your entire life?
Yeah, I would say that whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, once I make up my mind, it sort of stays made up. And it goes to my career, too, where even before I knew what it was called, I sort of vaguely wanted to I knew I was good at art, but I never wanted to be a fine artist. I wanted to sort of be the kind of artist who did signs and packaging and record covers and magazines and stuff like that. I had no idea what that profession was in suburban Cleveland. I didn't know a single person who did anything resembling it. When I found out it was called graphic design, which was midway through high school, I sort of just zeroed in on that and decided that's what I was going to do, and I've never thought twice about it. I sort of tell people, don't do what I did. I think you could marry the first girl you kissed if that's your inclination, but I think sampling a lot of experiences in terms of your professional and intellectual life is actually a great thing.
Well, Michael, you are stepping back in your role now, and I guess I'm curious, why was now the moment that you're doing so?
I think because I sort of have such a tendency to be a very dedicated creature of habit. I'm a real kind of what in Japan they'd call a salary man. I sort of really, notorious for wearing a jacket and tie to work every day. I would just dutifully go in 9 to 5, usually earlier than 9, later than 5, Monday through Friday. And when the pandemic came along, it sort of broke all of us of a lot of habits that we had. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, hey, I didn't have to be doing that every day. It turns out you could sort of live a life that was more nuanced and flexible and had a degree of unpredictability to every day. And in fact, success wasn't tethered quite as much as I had convinced myself it was in simply reporting for duty faithfully at the same time every day in uniform. But there were certain things that I realized as I got older. I think particularly once I became a grandfather, I have 2 grandsons. I started thinking I'm a different person than I was when I was in my 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. And, you start out as at least I started out as like a prodigy youngest twerp in the room who would surprise people by having anything intelligent to say. And now, without doing anything except getting older, you can't pretend you're a prodigy anymore. And I sort of realized, a lot of the things that I was best at doing were things that you're only entitled to do with a certain amount of time and wisdom, let's say. And there's other things that I once was really good at that I realize other people now are much better at. And so going through that made me just sort of evaluate, hey, what do I want to do? What am I really good at? What's the really valuable, interesting contribution I can make to the design process, say. So I focused on those things and started handing off the other things to people that were more capable and more energetic and more at a different point in their career where they could take it on with a greater degree of energy.
I mean, you're sort of famously known as an exceptional strategist, and I want to understand, and I want our listeners to understand what exactly that means. What does it mean to get into the room with somebody and sell your idea? What does it mean to be a strategist, given your title is strategist at large?
What's interesting about graphic design is that you're always in this context where you're working with editors, you're working with marketers, you're working with musicians, you're working with scientists or politicians or football team owners or whoever you're working with, and they don't speak your language. You are a means to an end that they have, which is really final goal for everyone. And so while you're doing that, you have to figure out some way to connect what you're interested in doing and what you're good at doing with what they're trying to achieve. And people do it a lot of different ways. Some people just do it by cultivating this sort of mystic exoticism and kind of get people to just sort of like trust them in a guru-like way. Other people have just unbelievable charisma and force of personality and just can speak with such absolute self-assurance that their clients have sort of no choice but to kind of like agree with them. I've never been good at either mystifying people into things or using sheer force of charisma. And also, I sort of would find myself just kind of enraptured in what other people were talking about when they were describing their business, frequently things I knew nothing about. I got a real vocational education as a designer. I barely took any classes that weren't about design. So everything I've learned was sort of on the job or peeking over Dorothy's shoulder as she did her MBA homework. So in doing all of that, I sort of got good at going into a room, listening to a whole bunch of people around a table talking. I mean, I personally just got really interested in and got, I think, good at kind of extracting meaningful input from that situation and then translating that into something actionable that me and my designers could then convert into a designed response for the brief we had received, right? And so somewhere in there is something you might call strategy.
It sounds to me like what you're saying is you kind of got good at sussing out the brief in the brief, or doing this journalist skill of like, it's not necessarily what someone says, but really what they mean. And sort of differentiating those two things feels really key. It feels like when you actually listen to what someone's trying to communicate that they can't quite articulate, you can respond better and you can offer them a designed response better to what their real problem is. I am curious what your batting average has been like over the course of your career and then presenting that final idea. Do you feel like when you were able to present that final idea that you were doing something from design to the way you presented it that got more of the ideas you liked across the line and got a client to adopt them?
It's a little bit of a tricky question because there's things that I've done that I consider outright successes that I don't think have been particularly impressive to my colleagues, but I sort of thought were absolutely appropriate responses to a particular brief. Now, some people would say I've got a capacity to put up with mediocre conservative work, and other people wouldn't put up with it. They have to get up and kind of like do the end of the fireworks show every time. But I've always thought if you had a city where every building was designed by a starchitect, it would be oppressive and kind of numbing and unpleasant. What makes New York beautiful is not just the signature landmark building, but it's all those like brown buildings that stretch between them, all of like the row houses on the Upper West Side or in Brooklyn, or even just like kind of the nondescript kind of tax-paying buildings. I think when you're in design school, either explicitly or implicitly in your training is that the highest goal of design is to invent something wholly new, and that the best thing for any design solution is to devise something that's utterly revolutionary and hence unfamiliar. And obviously, even when I put it that way, you can sort of see the catch, right? I've worked with law firms, for instance, and every presentation, sometimes they present it to me. They'll sort of say, here's the brief, and they'll show me their website, and they'll show me their 8 competitors' website in a 3x3 grid on a PowerPoint. And they'll say, look, these all look the same. And, at first I thought, well, let me add it. I'll fix that. And I'll say, what if you had the craziest looking website in the law profession? And you realize that they don't want that any more than they want to go to a customer so they can show up in court wearing Revolutionary War garb or a sexy devil costume. Or so they want to look nondescript so that their ideas actually lead. One of the things that's true I think it's true with every kind of design, but it's particularly true with graphic design, is Raymond Loewy's theory that you want to balance sort of familiarity and novelty because people have these competing drives. They want the excitement of something new, but if they get too much of that, they get nervous and exhausted. And so they then crave the comfort of something familiar. If they get too much of that, they get bored and sleepy. And so you sort of have to figure out a middle path in any solution that kind of is differentiated in a way that actually is appropriate and defensible and understandable to people within an organization and communicable to people outside that organization.
I would love to get a bit into your process, Michael. I mean, I think that you have worked with a very unique process over time and that you still work in Sketchbook. And my understanding is you haven't adopted digital tools. You're not a sort of Adobe Illustrator artist and things like that. And one, what value does that bring? What's the uniqueness of still doing that? And then two, how have you been able to get by doing that so long in this time?
Well, the structure of Pentagram is such that each of the partners there assembles a team of collaborators who work only for that partner. And any skill I didn't have, I quickly realized that and started hiring to compensate for my own shortcomings, which grew more and more acute the older I got and the more the landscape out there changed. And so I'm probably one of the youngest old designers out there who sort of never really acquired any sort of facility of designing on a computer. But on the other hand, there's a school of thought in graphic design that I think is associated with unofficial Pentagram co-founder Bob Gill, whose idea was if you had a potent enough idea, you would just ascribe it to someone over the phone, and that would be enough. And what typeface it was, what color it was, whether it was created in computer or by hand, whether you built it out of clay or you built it out of pixels, whether it's animated or static, if the idea was sufficiently compelling, how it got rendered and delivered was a variable that could come later in a way. I'll admit the things that I found really exciting when I was a kid. I had an uncle who had a subscription to Esquire magazine when George Lois was doing all the covers. And I knew just enough about the world and culture to remember seeing that cover of Andy Warhol drowning in a can of Campbell's soup. And the headline Lois was given was "The Total and Final Collapse of the Avant-Garde starring Andy Warhol," or something like that. And, I sort of knew that Andy Warhol had painted Campbell's soup cans, and here he is getting sucked into a whirlpool and disappearing right into the soup. And, Lois could have just said, okay, here's my idea for the cover. It's a picture of Andy Warhol, and he's drowning in a can of Campbell's soup. And he would have gotten approved like that.
You've said that what got you into graphic design more than anything was words, right? And I think that's really telling, right? Like it's more about the idea, not to demote execution, but it seems like what you really truly love about graphic design is coming up with that cleverness, that idea that sort of drives the visual forward.
Yeah, and a lot of times the most important work that I've done for projects were things that no one would ever see, but it would be sort of the first few slides of the presentation that sort of set the stage for what our solution would be. Like if you talk about when we first presented the idea that we used for Saks Fifth Avenue, where our brief basically got reduced to we're a venerated name that has been in most people's lives as long as they can remember. Their grandmother shopped here. Yet we want to sort of somehow project that we're on the cutting edge of fashion because that's where you have to be in that world. And I remember we had a couple of half-hearted forays into what if we threw out everything and just said, what if it just said Saks Fifth Avenue, this entirely new typeface? But you sort of realize it was just sort of like, all you were doing was like kind of jettisoning everything you had going for you and kind of like setting yourself on the same square one that every other person could claim. And that seemed kind of depressing. And then just almost out of desperation, I said, well, I mean, just practically speaking, when they did their last big overhaul, which at that point it was in the 70s, they kind of had this calligraphic logo, which looked very 70s, 80s, kind of Saturday Night Fever to me at that point. But I sort of thought, maybe if we kind of like tautened this thing up a little bit, it could work. And I remember as we were working, we had kind of like, I'm not much into mood boards, but we had our client was very sophisticated. And I remember we sort of had pulled together a bunch of things, early kind of modernist figuration things like Ellsworth Kelly and Franz Klein and people like that. And I remember kind of just these big gestural things had a kind of modern energy that seemed like they liked it. And then there was a moment in the studio where one of my designers, Carrie Powell, was kind of just cleaning up the curves on that old cursive logo, had it blown up really big on her screen so you could only see a fraction of one of the letters. Then I thought, that looks like, from where I'm sitting, that looks like a Franz Klein painting or an Ellsworth Kelly abstraction. And what if we told them that what they're looking for is already embedded in their DNA and all they have to do is look at it in a fresh way? And so when we went in and presented it, we just sort of like said, here's what Saks used to be, but here's like the modern world. And we showed some of those modern paintings and we said, what if you could use the vehicle you already have bought and paid for to get into that world? And I think, believe me, there's nothing easier than selling someone back a logo they already own. Everyone wants a new logo, but they really don't. And then you say, wait, the logo you've got, I can make it new for you. I've been lucky enough that often the things that excited me were seldom just because they represented some sort of unique opportunity for me to express some deeply felt artistic impulse that had been dwelling within me since childhood. Far from it. It sort of is nothing more, nothing less than the inputs that I had gotten in that particular situation kind of tailored for exactly that situation. And so that fit where you kind of like feel it, it's like you've tried a million locks and finally you feel the lock that works. It's just a beautiful feeling. It really is great.
I mean, it's classic art versus design.
Yeah.
I feel like, right? Like it's in service of solving a problem versus in service of sort of sheer expression.
Yeah.
And it's not sexy to say it, but it's a client service as well, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been lucky because I've had really interesting clients that I've learned a lot from and who I really have admired and enjoyed working with. As I got older, one of the skills I mastered was avoiding situations that I thought would be unpleasant or unproductive. I remember, almost at the midpoint in my, it was the early aughts when I just sort of like thought, I just don't want to work with people who I have to white knuckle my way through phone conversations with. I just don't want that anymore. And it's funny, you can't say that when you're 23, you can't say that. I think when you're in your 40s, you get to a point where you sort of think, I couldn't say it in my 20s. I think there are bold young people who I don't want to discourage them from being principled and kind of turning down work that's unsuitable for them. So go ahead and do that, guys. But
something to look forward to, younger designers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I laugh because I'm in my 40s and I feel like I'm at that sort of don't white knuckle through things point in my career, and it's not easy. It's not easy to say no to some of those things. Like there's
and I'm like a people pleasing person. I'm a polite Midwesterner. I've exited from jobs in progress and actually on a number of occasions sent people their deposit back, and I said, I don't think this is going to work out. And just to show, it's not you, it's me. Here's that money. Here's that advance you gave us back. I think, I'd often say, you're going to fire me within 2 months. I'm going to save us both 8 weeks of trauma and kind of like offer to sever right now.
That's amazing. As a fellow Midwesterner, all of us, like middle America people here, originally.
All of us.
I find this really inspiring, and I aspire to do that in my own form someday.
I just have to point out this amazing through line is marry the person who gave you your first kiss, but dump a lot of other people along the line. Break up with a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we've talked quite a bit about what it means to like make a client happy, but I think one part of the equation that I want to get into is how to make the consumer of the identity happy because, people notoriously love to hate on new logos. When a new logo launches, you can expect a chorus of, how much did they pay for that? I could have made that myself. Did you design that in Microsoft Paint? Just, the classic, what you're going to find on the internet. I'm curious, Michael, what logo throughout your career have you gotten the most shit for?
Without a doubt, it was what we did for Hillary Clinton in 2015 for the 2016 election. And that was because it functioned exactly as a symbol is meant to do. It came to represent the candidate who had no shortage of enthusiasts, but also became the center point for a lot of people who were not going to vote for her. I'll be absolutely honest. I remember when I worked on the logo for Secretary Clinton, which was a fantastic experience. The contact I had with her was really rewarding, engaging, and fantastic. It wasn't meeting after meeting, but it was just like a handful of meetings that I found really impressive, where she was a ideal client. But I remember, after we did our work, they went into a holding pattern. I had no idea whether they were going to use it or not. And then when she announced, they just had this short film where it said, "I'm Hillary Clinton. I'm running for president. I'd like to earn your vote." And at the very end of it was that little H with an arrow. And I remember thinking, oh, they ended up using it. How cool. And I just thought, no one will even notice. It just was a little thing at the end. And then within minutes on then Twitter, people started unloading like mad, to the point where I think it might have been even someone from Fast Company, I think, called up to ask me my opinion about this horrible new logo. And I said, I wasn't even sure how to answer because
Michael, this is my story, which is that, so this morning's happening. I can't forget this morning. And the logo hits. My editor at the time says, we need to get somebody to redesign the logo. Yeah. And she goes, how about Michael Bierut? And I said, immediately, how do you know Michael didn't do it?
Oh, really?
And she goes, he didn't do it. I'm like, are you sure?
It's too awful, yeah.
And so I remember sending this email to you, and you graciously don't name me, but I remember sending the email and being like, hey, we saw this logo. And then I remember debating this line because I had a sense that you made it at this point. But I felt like I was on this magnetic track where time isn't linear and you've already made the mistakes you're making in the future. And I remember parenthetical, I think it's terrible or something.
What would you do differently?
Yeah, no, exactly. You being so gracious and saying, I think I broke the internet enough for the day. And with an ellipses. But, I've thought about the logo a lot since then. And I know you have too. And it's almost like this unsolvable problem in my head. And so I do want to talk about it with you, which is, look, I think Hillary lost because of the patriarchy, fundamentally.
Yeah.
But she ended up losing to someone with a really kind of terrible brand aesthetic. And I have asked myself, would another brand system have made a difference in a really, really, really tight race, right? And I want to know how you feel about it. Do you think a different approach could have won in that situation or not?
Well, I mean, whenever I'd have meetings with anyone from her team, if I was meeting someone new, I'd always kind of make very clear that there's no evidence whatsoever that people vote for or against logos. They vote for candidates. Despite everyone's best efforts and claims that people like me and other propagandists would make about the power of our skills, I think people are motivated by very different things. And it's seldom just aesthetic reactions to symbols and stuff like that. The thing that I'm most proud of was, I remember kind of really deliberately thinking I wanted to do something that was really simple that people could actually make for themselves. And by the end of the campaign, I'd collected this vast library of versions of that symbol that people had made by themselves, that school children had made, that kindergartens had drawn, that people in individual states had fashioned out of materials particular to their own sense of identification with it. And so that mission was fully accomplished. At the same time, it also was something that was really useful for political cartoonists and other people. So there was a lot of magazines, and I collected those too, because I thought those were really exciting and interesting and sort of a symbol behaving the way a symbol's supposed to behave. I do think there were two things in a way that are related directly to the work that we did, that I would love to rethink in a way. One was, if I did one thing wrong, it was that I just sort of accepted a logo assignment as a logo assignment too much. Much of the team then were people who had been on Barack Obama's team. Barack Obama had famously, it's hard to remember this, but before Barack Obama, no candidate actually had quote unquote a logo. Like, it just wasn't done. People would have colors, or they would put like stars and stripes on their things or things like that, or they'd have a slogan, or they'd have something, but they wouldn't have.
Oh, we should just remind people what Obama's logo looked like, because it is iconic and it changed political aesthetics.
Yeah, and Obama had it was a circle, like an O, like his initial, O for Obama. And going into the O are a series of stripes that could look like a road going towards a new future. The counter space, the middle of the O, the empty part of the O, was usually bright and sort of rendered as if it was glowing. And so it looked like probably meant to be a rising sun rather than a setting sun, but it had this sense of dynamism and optimism and everything else. And interestingly enough, the story goes that when he was first shown it as something that they wanted to use on his website, he didn't like it because he thought it was too corporate looking. And in fact, it was designed using the same rationale you would use to design a logo for a tech startup, basically, and exactly those same things. And sort of at that time, no one else had put that sort of thinking to a political candidate, to my knowledge, at that scale at least. And he was persuaded by his advisors, like, look, no one looking at you, no one seeing your name doubts that you're an outsider, doubts that you're some unknown quantity, you have no name recognition. You're sort of like, we need to give something that looks capable and familiar, we need to provide sort of like this thing for people to grasp onto that feels friendly and familiar in a way. I think if you would have sort of leaned into who he really was as a candidate, you would have done something that was much more scrawled by hand and felt much more declamatory.
I mean, what you're kind of saying is they took a guy who had really come up in a very grassroots way.
Yeah.
And being like kind of Southside Chicago, like I believed he was going to be president before he was senator, right?
Me too.
And so they gave him like a very official corporate looking stamp. And you're saying with Hillary, it was already kind of perceived as a corporate person.
Yeah. So part of the problem was, I remember the very first brief was like our candidate has 100% name recognition. So how do you defamiliarize the familiar? And I remember one of the things, people tried to customize the Obama logo and do it by hand. And it's actually a very intricate thing that requires a great deal of skill. You can't draw it accurately by hand because it's got too many curves, and the curves are kind of really subtly related to each other, and you need Illustrator and Photoshop and access to kind of like software to get it exactly right. But I remember thinking, if we did something that, and in fact, Jennifer Kynan, who ended up being the design director of the campaign, at one point had called me up and said, we want to do a logo for people who have poor eyesight or are blind. And so we want to do an audio version of the logo. We went through the recording where you described the logo. So it was that perfect Bob Gill describe it over the phone thing. And you can do it. You can say, take a square, divide it in 9 modules, take 145-degree angle, and you can sort of like map it out that way. It's really simple. But I think the idea of it's a candidate, the candidate needs a logo, that was sort of fighting tomorrow's battle using the tools that won yesterday's battle, right?
Right. And you couldn't have known that Donald Trump was going to take an absolute sledgehammer to political branding either.
No. Then also, I think logos are one thing, but he actually had spent his life up to that point either building himself up to or reducing himself to a brand.
Exactly.
His entire business empire was based not on making anything or having any sort of innovation that was desirable to consumers or anyone else, but it's all about how much can I charge you to let you put my name on this thing, on this building, on this.
Are you saying the Pierce brand is built upon nothing?
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly right. And so I think, if you're talking about branding, it was like pure brand. And then there was also something really that I still find confounding and really mysterious. And I kind of have never really figured out what lesson you're supposed to derive from it, which is that the absolute signature centerpiece of the brand is the red hat with Make America Great Again, which actually doesn't bear his name.
Well, that's the power of it, though, right? I mean, it's a movement. It's not.
It's a movement. Exactly right. That was sort of what was confounding about it. And we weren't the last people to be confounded by Donald Trump. And it's barely noon on a Friday. And I'm sure the day and the weekend and the weeks to come will have more opportunities for the same guy to confound more people, including us, to our chagrin. So I think, Mark, to go back to your question, I don't think this was a case of, had we only had the right logo, had they only had like the right slogan.
Right. If you had 10 more tries.
Yeah.
Pentagram had 10 more tries. You don't think you got it?
No. I know, and not only that, but I was like, I'm really, really proud of that work. And none of these things are fights you do once and then kind of like, brush your hands off and then retire. You sort of have to, it's an ongoing struggle between different forces that configure themselves over and over again in different ways as history goes on. So there we have it.
It's pretty crazy to me how much has sort of stayed the same and changed 10 years on, right? We're almost 10 years after this logo first came out. But also, could you have imagined in 2015, 2016, where design is right now? AI, I feel like now we're in the age of the refresh. Like there's a lot to talk about, but I'm curious about what you make of this current moment in design.
Liz, that's a great question. And there might be some grand unifying theory that if I took the time to think it through, I could come up with. But I do think that the ease with which things can change, which is related to AI to a certain degree, because AI is promising this world where people barely have to exert any judgment or creativity. You just have a series of prompts that kind of like create an output that you can kind of like say, sure, yeah, that's fine. I will not reminisce about the old days, but if you were doing something in an analog world, it took so much planning just to get to the starting line. You had to have all your tools all lined up. You had to kind of get everything you needed to execute whatever your vision was on the table in front of you. Then you could start the laborious process of seeing if it would come out the way you wanted it to come out. So it took a lot of deliberate planning and a lot of points of no return. Now, everything is so effortless that it's sort of it's delicious, the ease of it. Who wouldn't want that sort of effortlessness? But in a way, it sort of means that you can kind of like take out forethought and intentionality and a lot of other things that go with that, passion and other things like that. I can remember a company changing its identity was like a big seismic thing when that thing was appearing on water towers and trucks and the sides of airplanes and stationery and closets at every branch office around the world and everyone's business card and everyone's wallet and everything else. And people would have to make a real case for our 30-year-old logo is showing its age. Why don't we update it or something? And now a new marketing director comes in and says, I've never liked that color. And also I want to make my mark and I want to change this thing to something new. I can view that with some sadness, but I can't object to it because likely as not, that's how I got the call in the first place to do the work that they're about to replace. Designers have always, in my opinion, been too enthusiastic about change and not as interested in continuity. Like I think invention is exciting and maintenance is boring. And I think a lot of times the first question I'll ask someone who is successful, who sort of says they want to change the thing they have, regardless what it is, I say, you seem to be doing okay. Why do you want to change this thing? Why don't you keep this thing? And usually then that's a great question to get people to really disclose what is really the reason they want to change it. Because if they have enough money to hire me, they've reached a certain degree of success. They're not failing usually. And so there's some other reason that's motivating them. And teasing that out a lot of times is the trick.
How many potential clients have you lost with that question?
Now I'm really devil may care about it. And I'm sort of like not in sales mode at all. I really sort of made up my mind a while back that I just would treat everyone as if it was my brother asking for advice about his civil engineering firm that he owns. And, he called me up, asked me about doing a logo, and I had this really frank conversation with him. And I remember thinking, hey, if I could talk to everyone like I just talked to my brother Don, that would be really great. And so I thought, why not try doing that? And so just probably within about a month ago, someone wrote to me and said, hey, we've got this thing and we want to change it. And I said, why don't you go back to the person who did it originally and just have them look at it? I'm not sure it really needs to be changed based on what you're saying. And he says, sure, let me try that. And so I've been doing that for years, actually. There's nothing more beguiling as a sales technique, by the way.
It is disarming.
Yeah. I think a lot of designers, and this is true with every kind of designer, it's true with architects, it's true with product designers, it's true with UI designers, it's sort of like they love what they do, and any chance they get to do it, they just are like, clear the decks, stand back, I'm going to do that thing that I love to do. And sometimes you just sort of have to think, what is it that the world really wants from this thing, from this moment? What would actually make the world a better place in a way? I don't think logos necessarily make the world a better place, although when I worked for Massimo Vignelli, he was very motivated by the idea that good graphic design, by simply being beautiful, but also being clear and concise and communicative and intelligent. If you went down on the subway and the signs were clear and well-designed and the map was clear and well-designed, you would have more confidence in public transportation, and that would actually make an urban experience better. And I think I still subscribe to that.
Michael, something that I've been thinking about, I was knee-deep in a magazine edit recently, and we are in the post-ChatGPT DALL-E era. And I remember debating some word choice or some line 2,000 words deep, right, in this feature. And my editor basically saying, you realize we're the last generation that's going to do this. They're not going to have the skills to do this in the future. The process won't be like this. And I can't help but see like a strong parallel there with graphic design and your field. And I'm curious where you see it in this moment as you're not stepping away, but definitely stepping down to an extent. And are you kind of departing at a time when is the golden age of graphic design sort of over in this sense?
No, I don't think it is. In theory, there's a new golden age that could happen that would operate in a different way at a different level. And you could argue that design really goes through cycles that are driven through technological change and technological advances. And I think that is not truer anywhere than it is in graphic design, where, from the invention of movable type to the invention of computer-aided design to everything else, it sort of is communications technology, switching from analog to digital. All of it sort of changes the rules of the game and the context with which we communicate with each other and the way that ideas get propagated. And I think we stand now at the precipice of this alarming thing that people both have seemingly great hopes for and these tremendous dread of AI sort of and what its potential is. There are lots of enterprises out there that are offering the ability of, if you sell shoes for a living, they can figure out a way to take your shoes, photograph them in a void, photograph them on a blue background, on a gray background, on a black background, a white background, on someone's feet standing on pavement, or someone's feet standing on pavement in Paris. And then they take your name and they can put it really big on the top. They can put it really small in the lower left-hand corner. They can have it faded in the background. They can have it repeated 10 times. It can do all that automatically, and then it can put all that on Instagram automatically. Then it can track which one of those variables is getting the highest number of clicks. And if it's Paris with the name in the lower left-hand corner is winning over white background with the name in the upper right-hand corner, the next wave that goes onto Instagram will all favor the lower left-hand corner and a pavement in Paris, right? And so without anyone actually exercising any judgment, and the only thing that's happening is this algorithmic sort of process. And that sort of thing happens and it works until it doesn't work anymore. Then someone does something that could be spontaneous or it could just be willful and crazy and counterintuitive. And all of a sudden that creates a new context. I think there's a kind of recursive entropy that sets in inherently with AI.
I definitely think the pendulum is always going to be swinging. That's just how style and art and commerce generally works. And I have to imagine that there are still clients, many, many clients out there who value ideas and craft. And that's not going to go away, even if the back-end optimization part of the equation is taken care of by technology.
Yeah.
So you're still going to be drawing in composition notebooks.
Yes, but I think actually, my drawings over the years have gotten more and more kind of primitive, and it's partly because what if it was Andy Warhol drowning in a can of soup? You don't have to render that accurately to kind of get that executed. It's a kind of shorthand. Predictive language models are inevitably based on what's the most likely word that comes out after this word, right? Which is magical when you sort of see it in action, but when you realize what's really happening, that's not where innovation is going to come from. And so, like I always say, innovation isn't 100% of the need. You need to have innovation in counterpoint with that. So I think the role of technology will be that thing that forms the foundation or background against which innovation can happen.
Yeah. So humans still 1 point ahead. I think that's a great place to wrap this. Michael, thank you so much for being our first guest. This was an absolute pleasure. Loved having you on the podcast.
Oh, I love talking to you, Liz, and to you, Mark.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we are back, and it's time for Best and Worst. This is our terribly named segment, which is where each of us nominates a best and worst design of the month, and we fight it out to decide which ones will take the prize.
Yeah, so definitely nominating the name of this segment as the worst design of the month because we just could not come up with a better name. Hot or Not, Wired or Tired, like anything other than best or worst. And yet here we are.
Here we are. So submit your better name, for which we'll pay no royalties. And in the meantime, we're going to kick off this segment. And our producer, Cody, will basically judge whether Liz or I are the winner. He is the arbiter of truth. He basically runs Fast Company now.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the power. I will wield it aggressively and keep you two at peace.
All right. My best design goes to Starbucks protein cold foam.
Wow,
Okay.
that is so protein bro of you.
It's so protein bro of me. Also, it's a name on par with about best and worst designs as a brand. But, you know, I was recently at Starbucks' big sort of rah-rah the troops event in Las Vegas. I tried this new menu item, and basically they figured out a way to mix in protein powder into their cold foam and add 15 to 18 grams, they don't know yet, of protein to like any drink. Any drink you can foamify at Starbucks can have 15 grams of protein.
Is that a lot? I have no idea.
It's a good amount. Yeah, I mean, it's like you're probably aiming for 20 plus per meal.
Is it flavored?
So it can be. It can be like unflavored, what you might call foam flavored. They had a banana flavor I tried that was really, you know, sweet, pungent in your face, but you can mix it in and it mellows out. They're going to do chocolate. Anything they can foam, they can just mix this protein powder into it. And, you know, a neat innovation story, right? Like it was all clumpy. It wasn't working out. Like they were, you know, anybody who's tried a protein powder knows it can be all nasty. And then they were like, what if we just blend it into the cold foam? And then like 2 weeks ago, they came up with this. And it's going to be like really big, I think.
Brave New World. What do you got, Liz?
All right, so I'm going in a different direction, and my pick are these bright pink chairs that have become what I would consider a symbol of the Los Angeles protests from a couple weeks back. I don't know if you saw this, but during the protests, these images started popping up of people hiding behind magenta chairs and tables as the National Guard was shooting rubber bullets.
I mean, it's so striking.
The photos were absolutely striking. It looked like these people were in a war zone, but they were using gorgeous furniture as shields, like so American. But, you know, like as it turns out, this park furniture it was designed more than a decade ago by the landscape architecture firm Rios. They had developed it for this park in Los Angeles, and they described it as having, like, I'm using air quotes here, but endless configurations. I don't think they quite envisioned this as one of those configurations. But you know, it's really dark, and I'm not sure if it qualifies as the best or the worst design of the bunch, but I do think that it really speaks to the moment that we're in.
I mean, I like it for best because like that the park they're from, right, is literally a park about like unity.
Right. Yes.
And so like the furniture is meant to signify this. And yes, not how I imagined furniture showing up sort of in my Instagram feed, for sure.
Yeah, no, it brought people together, but not in the way that they probably were hoping. So that's my best. And your worst, Mark? I'm excited for this one.
I mean, it's really tough to follow. Like the mass shutdown and deletion of protests and freedom of speech in America. But I'll try. I'm not sure if anybody follows the manga One Piece, also a Netflix show, anime. But anyway, Lego has come out with big One Piece sets that have been highly anticipated. I'm quite a fan of One Piece. So the Lego One Piece Buggy the Clown Circus Tent, which will cost $55 later this year, I pose is the worst design of the year thus far. It is awful.
Wait, I'm confused. What makes this particular set so offensive to you?
Yeah, so this is what's offensive to me. So look, One Piece is this great story about like pirates on endless adventures that get more and more hyperbolic. There are about 1,100 chapters in at this juncture. The creator's been writing it for decades. And Lego released the core pirate ship called the Going Merry, which is really iconic, wonderful, flawless Lego design work here. Okay. Then they also released this Buggy the Clown Circus Tent.
I'm sorry, the name. The name.
So it has everything like I kind of irks me about modern Lego, which is one, it's highly two-dimensional, right? There's all these Lego pieces that are like crappy Hollywood set pieces that feel like they're going to fall over. It's like $55 for like some plastic that's been branded. And then I just think it calls out like a really big issue here, which is there are like 1,000 more interesting scenes across, you know, the endless chapters of One Piece. But because Lego cut a deal with Netflix, it only covers the first season of the Netflix show. So it means that they are only highlighting like the fingernail on the entire story of One Piece. So this is why I hate it.
You know, IPers are going to IP. Like, what are you going to do? They've got some tie-ins to sell.
What is your worst design of the month, Liz?
I think the very obvious nomination is Donald Trump's gold phone. I don't know how much more there is to say about this. The president of the United States is selling a $500 phone, and it is gold or like gold-plated or aluminum colored as gold. I don't actually know what it's made of. But yeah, you know, I'm not going to get into specs here. But I do know that it's an Android phone, and yet somehow it's going to be made in the US.
But not at launch, right? Like that's right now, it's made overseas.
Well, I say that with a hint of sarcasm. I can't imagine how this is going to be made in the US. But like truly kind of impressive in the sense that like he is just so absolutely dedicated to his brand. Like the man knows what he likes, aesthetically speaking. And yet the move is sort of baffling to me. I don't know exactly how this is working. And I just think like the whole move towards celebrities / like the president trying to create these mobile networks is pretty fascinating. I don't know if you saw it, but Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes, who host the Smartless podcast, also just launched a mobile network, a Smartless Mobile. It's a discount carrier. Truly, mobile carriers are the new celebrity tequilas. It's a fascinating phenomenon.
Good way to pay for a podcast, though. Just start a phone carrier.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, we've got something to work towards.
Yeah, I think so. I think the solid gold phone, not a huge margin on that, but I'll sell aluminum. It's funny. I met with Milton Glaser years ago before his passing, and we talked about how he designed for Trump. And, you know, he talked about like designing a gold vodka bottle, essentially. And his quote was, "I'd say this is appealing to the lowest level of human activity." And it still perfectly applies to the gold Trump phone. Just a universally perfect quote.
Yeah, I mean, you could really fill your whole house with Trump-themed objects at this point. I don't know if you saw that Instant Pot is going to be licensing a Donald Trump Instant Pot now. I mean, brilliant. Like the overlap there, bullseye.
Will we ever get a bidet?
Great question. Okay, Cody, we got to know, who's the winner?
Yeah, Cody. Who do you hate more?
So let's start with the best. My first inclination was going to be to pick the Starbucks protein cold foam because that is just the one segment of my day that I can't add cottage cheese as a cheap protein supplement. So yeah, that was my inclination. And then I didn't know about the Rios Chairs barricade story. And as you were talking about it, I looked up a picture and found Rios on their Instagram page actually like fully embraced this as an act of resistance and moment of solidarity on behalf of the city of Los Angeles. So I can't pick cold foam. I can't pick protein. I have to go with the chairs for the best design of the month.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Protesters don't need protein or anything. Sorry, go ahead. What was our worst?
The worst, this is going to be counterintuitive, but I used to have a gold phone, a gold iPhone, and I loved it. So I'm going to stand in principle with gold phones as being cool, and generally against the particular one we talked about, but I love gold phones.
Oh, man.
Whoa.
Okay. So listen, I had a rose gold laptop for many years. Loved it. I can co-sign the hint of gold in a technology product. But Cody, come on.
So I'm going to make my case against the Lego one-piece Buggy the Clown's circus tent. One, Legos shouldn't cost $55 a set. I know it's been that expensive for years and years, but I grew up on Legos being cheap. They were not like a class-based toy. And now to get into new Lego sets, they are plastic.
They are plastic.
They are hard plastic when you step on them with bare feet. I hate the IP-ization of every possible thing. I think Lego should have stopped at Lego Star Wars. And just looking at this set, it looks like you took a shoebox full of random Legos, dumped them out, and had any random 6-year-old just put them together. It looks like garbage. Every gold phone I've ever seen looks awesome. Worst design of the month is the Lego one-piece Buggy the Clown's circus tent. Sorry, Lego. Do better.
It is decided.
Our show is produced by Cody Nelson, mixed and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen.
Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you next month.
I was off the record, Josh. This was all off the record.